name's David Meikle, and I am a reformed ad agency guy. I used to work at Grey Advertising in London, Ogilvy and Mather in London, and then, for reasons which are still mysterious to me, I ended up running Ogilvy Russia for 4 years. Before I started my own business 7 years ago called Salt, Salt simply being symbolic of value. And my reason for starting this business was I shared an insight with a couple of partners that the way marketers and their procurement colleagues behave, the way they buy, the way they manage agencies, the way they source agencies, is not necessarily conducive to getting the best value from agencies. So I've spent the last few years looking into that as an issue and developing a new way in which we can approach this marketing procurement triangle. So the $64,000 question is, why on earth do we need another marketing book? There's no shortage of them. My insight is that, I called this How to Buy a Gorilla, inspired by the Cadbury ad of 2007 of the gorilla playing Phil Collins in the Air Tonight, which captured the imaginations of the nation overnight. In fact, for the finale of Big Brother is when it first aired. But for 2 years after that, in the new business circuits, going through ISBAR and the AAR and oyster catchers was, we want to buy a gorilla. And my observation was, actually, I don't think you can. And what I wanted to talk about was why. If we look at this triangle of marketing, procurement and agencies, pitch frequency, except for a small dip after Brexit, has been at its highest ever levels, indicating client satisfaction is low, agency tenure is shorter than it's ever been. The latest ISBAR paying for advertising report said that 46% of clients were unhappy with the deal that they had with their agency. And Kingston Smith, which is an accountancy firm to a lot of marketing services agencies, have found in their reports that agency profitability is at an all-time low. So we seem to have a triangle here of mutual dissatisfaction. My observation is that marketing often feel that agencies are inefficient. Time is money, and agencies are paid by the hour, and therefore, if they're dragging their feet to make more money, then brand performance is inhibited because that money could be doing something else, could be of greater value. Procurement, on the other hand, have an ongoing imperative for cost reduction. It's their job to avoid cost or to reduce cost, but so should be their brief to protect value. However, the responsibility for value is largely devolved to marketers. To illustrate that with a short story, I did a training session for marketing procurement people at ISBAR a few years back, and it turned out to be my last session because of the answers that I got when I asked 2 questions at the beginning of the day. Question 1 was, who here is personally incentivized with a bonus to reduce spend in marketing services? To which all hands went up. Some of the companies represented are on that board, and I won't name names. The second question was, who here has got any KPIs or has a bonus contingent on the value of the marketing services they procure? No hands. So essentially, procurement has control without responsibility in this triangle. And agencies, as we know, are largely drowning, not waving. They have to hang on to their talent. They have to hang on to their clients. But because they've become a commoditized business in the sale of hours, the only way that they can increase their revenues is by selling more hours, either on more brands or more projects or more hours on the same projects. So what we have here is a triangle which has interests which are mutually exclusive at worst or divergent at best. Yet the 3 in this triangle are responsible for the production of a return on a marketing investment. Now, the result of divergent interests is what Sergio Leone illustrated very well, is a Mexican standoff. In a Mexican standoff, nobody trusts one another, nothing happens very fast, and it can be terribly expensive. The economics of trust are such that low trust equals low speed equals high cost. So to illustrate that, post 9/11, the length of time it took for security checks in airports, security machines in airports went up because trust went down. Conversely, if you think of paradigms like, or examples like W.H. Smith's, where you pay for your own paper in the box, that is a high trust, high speed, low cost exercise. So the problem is that we have this triangle that I think is largely dysfunctional right across the industry where these three groups are responsible for producing value. Now, the book that I've written covers all of this, but today I'm only going to look, well, I'm mostly going to look at the marketing to agency relationship and how that works. So, start with, what is a gorilla? Because not everybody's going to have a gorilla playing a drum kit. So, gorillas take lots of different forms. They can be anything from throwing 250,000 rubber balls, which was actually all of the rubber balls that were available in the United States at the time, down the street in San Francisco to sell Bravia televisions. In doing so, Bravia sold out of televisions in the UK 7 weeks after this launched. It could be using Harvey Keitel in Direct Line, which has transformed the insurance business over the last 2 years and seen unprecedented growth for that brand. It could be a fisherman kicking a bear where it hurts. Now, these were referred to this morning as fluffy ideas, but these fluffy ideas, when they're gorillas, are transformative. They can significantly change the performance of a brand and the performance of his business. John Lewis is an example. During 2010, when we were still in the heart of a financial crisis, grew their revenue by 13%. They have a number of characteristics. They break the rules of formats, they break the rules of styles, they break the rules of branding. John Lewis, the first John Lewis ads that were aired, you had no idea what brand was being advertised until the end, which is something that normal processes with Millward Brown would say were entirely the wrong thing to do. You've got a Guinness commercial there that cost £2 million, shot by Jonathan Glazer, a world-renowned filmmaker. They break rules in all sorts of places. But they've been championed for this. In my case studies of Cadbury and Sony, I found that the marketing directors for both of those brands nearly lost their jobs as a result of championing the work the way the work ought to be. Sony wanted to say it's all about sound and colour, not just colour. Cadbury said this ad will never run. Yet these were transformative pieces of work. So a very high originality, which felt like greater risk. But actually, the relationship between risk and return in any investment applies to advertising as much as it does to pension funds. But we tend to think of advertising as a cost rather than an investment from which we want to get a return. There is a need for this. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the work that's been done by Les Binet and Peter Field through the IPA, but this work has basically demonstrated that brand advertising works. It is an empirical analysis that says a number of things that are very important. One is that actually brand advertising is the most effective and efficient way of growing your business over time. Broadcast advertising is more efficient and more effective at building growth than brand activation. But budgets are seeing a disproportionate amount going into brand activation rather than brand growth. When I spoke to Direct Line, they still can't understand why their business is doing so well. I said, that's because you started 2 years ago. You launched this campaign 2 years ago, and now it's working. If you think of the purchase cycle for car insurance, they've maybe had 2 hits of relevance because it's an annual thing. So we need to think about how advertising works in the long term. Owned and earned media help, but paid for media and proper budgets are much more important than ever. Penetration drives growth better than loyalty. And video is still the most powerful medium for long-term success. Now, the only observation that I would make here is that not everybody necessarily wants a gorilla. So I think that what I've done with my work overall is to say, actually, a gorilla's not for everybody, because different brands have different business problems and different business priorities that they have to work within. So let's take two different considerations. One is, does your market have a high capacity for growth? That doesn't mean, is your market growing? It means, is your brand able to grow in that market? Is your market advertising responsive? Is your market advertising dependent? If the answer to those are yes, then this is a high capacity for growth market. And the second question is, do you have a significant market share? Now, if you have a high capacity for growth and you have a significant market share, then you want a gorilla. And in a moment, I'll elaborate a bit more about how a gorilla is different to the other two primates I shall introduce you to now. If you have a large market share, but it is not a responsive market, then probably the only role for advertising is to maintain what it is that you've got. Because if you took it away, then that vacuum would be occupied by other brands, and therefore you would lose share. So here, we have an orangutan. And an orangutan fulfills that role. Now, if you have a low market share and you've got the capacity for growth, then you're a challenger. You're a small, nimble thief of market share. And therefore, perhaps, you're a spider monkey. So the idea is that these three apes, monkeys, primates, I think, is the only collective, although I call it the monkey house. These three characterize the different kinds of needs and the different roles of advertising that you might want. And the monkey house is a framework by which we can better remember how we can get this kind of advertising. So, gorillas are useful when market is in growth or where growth is achievable and a brand has high market share. Now, if a brand is in growth or has high market share, you should expect that there will be challenger brands to it. Therefore, you need something which is original to replenish the customers that you might lose to challengers and to fight off challenger brands and maintain leadership. You cannot do that by staying the same. But because they have critical mass and they already have a loyal base, they should be brave enough and strong enough to behave differently and to change themselves. They're good at protecting and increasing share, and they're good at fighting off spider monkeys, they're good at fighting off orangutans. Most importantly, and if you think about the news that we've seen in fact, even just in the last 48 hours, I'm not going to talk about Trump, I'm going to talk about chocolate. Toblerone have announced that they're changing the amount of chocolate that you get in the bar because the cost of goods has gone up. If you were advertising a brand like that with gorillas, then you get price flexibility. You've got price elasticity. And price elasticity is the most valuable thing you can have when you've got fluctuations like that in a market. And we've never been in more uncertain times when that could be a greater requirement. Spider monkeys, on the other hand, are very useful for brands that have a small market share in a growth market or where growth is achievable, and therefore they're going to have limited resources. They're not going to be as cash rich as the gorillas. They're smaller, they're more nimble, but they have to work much harder for attention. And they have to take greater risks in order to be able to steal share from the likes of gorillas. They're great for getting new customers and promoting trial, but unless the product itself is superior, they'll fail because they won't have that continued presence because they can't yet afford it. So they're great at stealing. And lastly, you have the orangutan. Now, there's nothing wrong with orangutans. They're very useful when market activity is limited, and they'll protect market share effectively in quiet periods. They aren't very good at fighting off spider monkeys or gorillas, but they rarely need to because their markets are largely inert. Although they are slower, they're sometimes more predictable, they are crowd pleasers. Everyone loves an orangutan. So they shouldn't be underestimated for their role. But largely, they're competing against other orangutans, and therefore their primary role is to protect their market share. Now, the key question is, if we recognize that there are three potentially broadly different roles for advertising, how do our processes and behaviors change according to these different needs? The answer is that in all of the experience I've had over the last 7 years examining this, is that they don't. Even companies with portfolios of brands don't have different processes for challenger brands, or what might be called in a Boston matrix a question mark, versus a cash cow or a star. So we need to create environments that are conducive to the types of advertising that we need. Now, I'll jump here to what procurement term a supplier preference matrix to give you some insight as to how agencies work and to how talent works and why we need to change the way we work in order to get the talent we need to solve our problems. So if you imagine this simple 2x2 matrix, on this side you've got the attractiveness of the client. Now that might be the brand, that might be how nice they are to work with. It can be that they've got very clear processes. It can be a number of different things. It's subjective and it's relative within any agency. And then across the bottom, you've got their financial value. Again, subjective and relative within any agency that you're working with. It could simply be buying power. It could be how important you are as a share of the agency's revenue. It could be your profitability. It could be that you're good payers. There are a number of reasons why you might move this way across the chart. Now, if you're an unattractive client who's not a very good payer, or you're not worth much, then you would be classified as a nuisance.
Sorry, is this me in relation to my customer?
This is an advertising agency. So this is how an advertising agency will manage its portfolio of clients.
Oh, okay.
So if you're a nuisance client to your agency, then they will mostly ignore you, or they'll do the minimum amount that's required to satisfy you, and they'll lose you without pain. When I ran Ogilvy Russia, we had a white goods manufacturer who insisted on using our creative people to translate copy from another country, which was just, this is what I would hand that out to punish people. It wasn't fun work to work on. Now, on the other hand, if you are a low-value client but you're very attractive, you're very interesting, you perhaps create a great brand or creative opportunity for reputation, then this is a developed showcase client, and you will nurture that client and build that reputation, hopefully turning them into a core client. A core client is one that is of high value and very attractive to work on. So you would defend these clients vigorously, you'll cosset them, and you will over-deliver for these clients. And then lastly, if you're a high-value client but you're a bit of a pain to work with or you're not terribly attractive to work with, you'd be what I call bread and butter. Now, that is not to say there is no value to the agency in you. It is to say that you're a certain kind of client. You're not going to be winning awards on this piece of business in the agency, but you are of high value, and therefore the agency will do what's necessary to keep you. So they'll maintain a satisfactory level of service, but they will service you efficiently, and they need to make sure that you're a profitable piece of business. Now, if you were to consider where an agency would put its talent, where would you allocate your best talent? Your high value. We'll come on to that. Your high value core clients are going to be your absolute priority. These are your flagship clients, the ones that build and make your reputation. So when DDB first launched back in the early 60s, VW was their core client, and they built and have maintained that relationship with VW since then. Now, what's interesting about this is also most clients' self-perception of where they are in their agency's portfolio. Now, it's not just egotism that puts them there, it's because all of their agencies tell them that's where they are. I know you're in the denture fixative business, but that's a very interesting, challenging market for us. We've only got our best people working on your account. So, if you were to consider for a minute the whole of the pool of talent that's available to work in advertising agencies, I've actually made a talent pool. What tends to happen is your agencies divide across this spectrum from the most talented that float to the top and the least talented that tend to sink to the bottom. Now, within that, you can have an agency down here, which within its departments will have people in creative, planning, account management, production, some of whom are great and some of whom are not so great, some of whom might be on their way to the departure lounge. Likewise, you'll have that even the best agencies. So even in Abbott Mead Vickers and Adam and Eve DDB, the two biggest and most successful creative agencies at the moment, you will have some great and some not so great. The trick here is that the worst of a great agency can be better than the best of an average agency. Likewise, the best of an average agency can be better than the average of a better agency. It's a slightly mercurial situation, but this is why supplier preference and your position in supplier preference is so important if you want to get value. Because talent sorts itself out, even if agencies weren't putting their best people on their best clients, because career success is determined by the caliber of agency that you've worked on and the accounts that you've worked on, then they will automatically migrate and self-promote themselves to the better pieces of business to work on. Now, that means it's kind of organic in one respect because the talent will migrate towards the better pieces of work. But imagine equally, it would not only be suicide for an agency to start putting its best people on its not best clients, but equally, when they start working on clients that haven't got that kind of reputation, they withdraw the discretionary effort that makes them talented in the first place. You cannot force talent out of an agency. Now, that counts for most disciplines. Creative advertising agencies, media agencies, direct marketing agencies, interactive agencies, it's very difficult to table thump for talent. Now, if you consider where clients are, in your average top 30 creative agency, for example, they might have 3 core clients. They'll have a couple of developed showcase. They'll have a couple of nuisances. But they'll have a hell of a lot of bread and butter. The actual talent priority, to your point, sir, is that they will make sure that if there is a developed showcase opportunity, that they will exploit that with the best talent. They will make sure that if they've got 3 clients here who are responsible for 30 or 40% of the agency's revenue, that they will put great talent on that, and they will make sure that they've got their best talent on their core clients. These are the hot spots for talent, but they're also the hot spots for the greatest motivation of people in agencies. This is where you'll find the people who can make a gorilla. This is the likes of VW and Nike enjoy those kind of positions. This is where you'll find people who can make spider monkeys. Paddy Power is a brand that only uses spider monkeys. All they do is deploy one amazing creative stunt after another. When I worked in Grey, I worked on Ben Sherman shirts. I relaunched Ben Sherman shirts in 1997. It was the lowest, I mean, we lost money. We didn't even make contribution on that business, but we didn't care because for an agency that was renowned for pills and pet foods, this was a real opportunity to shine creatively and have people reappraise the agency. Down here, you'll find people who can do orangutans really well. Now, these people are working on clients that are less attractive to work on, but they're also people who are probably later in their careers, they've been there, done that, they've got less to prove, and therefore they'll just be paid well to look after the really big, important clients. You'll find a Mars here, and you'll find Procter & Gamble here. Now, the reason that Mars is here is if you think of Mars Pet Foods and Mars Confectionery, they've consolidated all of their business into what is now the biggest agency by billings in history in this country, which is AMV BBDO. And therefore, they get the highest caliber of people who can produce an ad like, whether or not you like it, their Rowan Atkinson ad for Snickers has been given an Effectiveness Gold Award for being the most effective international ad ever made. And because they divided the cost across all of the markets, the production cost of that was about £37,000 per market. Procter & Gamble make their living being down here. They have very tough processes, but they have to have tough processes. They have to be prescriptive about their work, otherwise they'll be cannibalizing brands in their own portfolio in the same category. The danger area is here, which is where the majority of clients are in the majority of agencies, and this is the problem that I wanted to highlight. Because this is where you get the less talented, the more mediocre. So clients who regularly complain about the caliber of people on their business, or that they've got high turnover of talent on their business, this is the zone that they're in, and that's the zone of diminished value. And that's the challenge. So to extend this analogy a little further, I've developed it so that we can think about what it is that we need to do to get those kind of players. So if you want a gorilla, you need to invest proper money. So you have to be this side over the supplier preference matrix. They need to be treated with respect, as you would respect a gorilla if you met one. If you tell them what to do, they won't work for you. They respond best to collaboration, encouragement, and support. If you defend them, if you feed them well, you pay them properly, if you reward them and bonus them, they will work hard for you and they will deliver. For spider monkeys, they need plenty of freedom to perform to their best, so you cannot be prescriptive. You need to be much looser with your briefs and ask for guidance to get that kind of work. The nature of their performance can be quite unpredictable, so you're in a much higher risk scenario if you want to get a high return from a lower investment, which is what these are all about. They're not as hungry as gorillas, so they're not as expensive, but they do need to be well rewarded if they perform well. So if actually you do have a challenger brand that comes in with a small market share and then achieves huge amounts of growth for you beyond expectations, you need to share in that reward. Otherwise, what you will do is damage your reputation in future. And if brands with high market share have an appetite for risk, they can employ spider monkeys too. So if you think about Burger King, for example, their suggestion of the McWhopper was a fantastic idea, which was a spider monkey idea within a brand that normally used what I would describe as orangutans. The Carlsberg poster, which had a beer tap on it, probably the best poster in the world. The box of Snickers that was sent to the BBC for Jeremy Clarkson after he lamped his producer. All of these were small spider monkey ideas that really captured the imagination of their audiences. Now, orangutans are hungry, so they need feeding, they do need to be paid, but their rewards are smaller than gorillas. But they are lower risk investments. So you would expect a lower return, but it's a safer and more predictable investment. This makes them more predictable, but their returns are going to be lower, as you would expect. Low risk, low return, higher risk, higher return. But the problem is that if you deploy an orangutan in a market where you're competing with gorillas and spider monkeys, you will most likely lose. Now, my observation when you look at these three different needs is that the predominant market circumstances for brand advertisers would suggest that they need a gorilla. And the predominant ideas of best practice, both in procurement, ways of working with agencies, are consistent with orangutans. Hence, ROI is compromised. Hence, regular agency disappointment, high turnover of tenure, etc. So that's the problem that I seek to address in new ways of working, new ways of thinking, new ways of remunerating, so that in the middle of this triangle, you have a shared interest and a shared purpose as to what kind of advertising you're trying to create. In summary, different brands in different circumstances have different needs. Different kinds of advertising need different agency talent, the right people for the job with the right motivation. Ad agency talent responds to the nurture as much as they do the nature. So the nurture is how you work and how you pay, and the nature is the brief and the product. So how you work and how you behave together and how you pay your agency. Beware. Procurement are treating your investments as costs. Processes and behaviours, you need to be aware of processes and behaviours that will diminish your supplier preference. If the way you behave and treat your agency is moving you down into that danger zone of supplier preference, then your return will be compromised. And agencies that protest that you're their most important client, you can't ask an agency to tell you that you're not. It's impossible. I know, I've been there. I've had clients who are saying, well, how do we fit in your... Oh, you're really valuable. Because I can't say, actually, we've put some mediocre people on your brand as a safe pair of hands because that's what you're after. Because no client says that that's what they're after in that way. So How to Buy a Gorilla, which I hope will be published before the end of the first quarter next year in time for the London Book Fair, can be your guide. from your business problem to the kind of monkey that you need, to the kind of agency, the kind of relationship, and the kind of talent that can deliver it. Thank you very much. I would welcome your thoughts.